War. Today's geopolitical climate buzzes of it. We hear of wars of aggression, spiritual wars, standoff wars, mere wars, proxy wars, and maybe we think to ourselves, oh, the world must be coming to an end. It's just war everywhere now. Truth is, for almost all of human history, war was the rule, and the exception was peace. I remember when I began thinking of war and then trying to understand it. I was in my early 20s, and a documentary about the Second World War just absolutely gripped me. I was suddenly very aware of how this war shaped the world we live in today, how high the stakes were, and most importantly, it exposed me to humanity's great capacity for evil, depravity, cunning, and just to be even-handed, genius too. Most importantly, I was struck by how a seemingly ordinary person allowed evil to take over his life, his environment, and his soul. How some even reveled in it. It led to interesting questions. How do you end up justifying the violence that war demands so eloquently to ourselves and to the world? How does it change us? The history of war seemed a good place to start. War must have started as small-scale, unorganized raids. We can say that with some confidence, since studies of apes in the wild show that small-scale intertribal conflicts were very common in the lives of our closest relatives. So I'm sure it is easy to imagine early hominins engaging in conflicts like these. But these conflicts must always involve small groups and involve the weapons that we naturally possess, teeth, hands, etc. When did it get so serious that we began crafting weapons of war? When did the conflict get so serious that our species decided that the natural weapons we are endowed with weren't enough anymore, and we needed to get more efficient at killing and then winning? The natural assumption would be that tool-making hominins eventually turned those tools against each other. And this makes sense, but we must appreciate what a big leap this is. We know of other species that use tools to hunt or sustain themselves. Crows using rocks to smash lizards against, orangutans spearfishing, chimps cracking nuts with rocks. All of that happens. But no other species is recorded to have used tools in intra-species conflict. Why did we start? Could it possibly be that early human settlements became so large and demanded so many resources that another human settlement in the vicinity became a threat to their sustenance? Did early humans collectively justify making weapons of conflict and killing to secure resources for themselves and make sure their sustenance was guaranteed? No one can really tell, but it is the most probable and evolutionarily consistent answer. As we became more sophisticated, with the rise of farming and permanent settlements, conflicts obviously became more sophisticated and organized. Settlement A had a bad crop year, and the food that they had saved is either stale or running out. They need to source food from somewhere or they will all starve. I mean, how would you think? You would eye settlement B and the resources they have. You need what they have to survive. Of course, settlement B won't take this lying down. They would fear aggression from resource-starved groups and be at the ready to defend their properties and their rights to live. A perfect recipe for war. Innocents were massacred in these wars. There is a great psychological hurdle that had to be overcome here. This is the natural resistance of a human to killing another human. Well, most humans face this resistance. How was this overcome? Fear-induced moral disengagement was definitely a factor. It's either us or them, or this must be done for us to survive. People had to, and still have to, convince themselves that ethical standards don't apply to the situations that birthed the conflict. The will to live that people possessed manifested as fear of death, which then led to the death of others. Death was unavoidable, by the way. The formation of state seems to have been a direct answer to the uncertainty of sustenance and the conflicts it generates. Strength in numbers was a tried and tested concept from hunter-gatherer times, so why not scale that? A state would require a governing body that made the rules and guaranteed the security of the people they govern. This freed up other people to go about their everyday lives and farm or add value or create resources for the community they lived in whatever way. This brought the concept of organized armies and mass production of weapons of war into the world. The concept of a state solved one problem but ended up creating another. To be entirely fair, this problem already existed, but not at this scale. Group identity and identity fusion. War thrives on the tribal brain. All wars had people on either side thinking, it's us versus them. There would always be some identity that united people. State, community, belief in the same God. It happens when a person's individual identity becomes inseparable from their group identity. In identifying with it, they become it, and then are willing to sacrifice themselves and others for it. The affairs of the group have become personal to them. Statehood gave a name, an anthem, and a symbol to their group identity. People could say they are from such and such state and feel like they belonged. And when that fuses with who they are personally, they're willing to die to protect it. This also affords a layer of psychological convenience for them. When violence is committed for a state or a leader, the burden of responsibility for the lives that they are taking somehow shifts to a concept that they tell themselves they are defending. A good example to showcase this is the Nazification of Germany during the Second World War and the horrible acts of violence perpetrated in its name. Normal people like you or me, ended up parading men, women, and children to trenches and shooting them as they huddled together in fear. These men were able to dodge the trauma that doing something like that would bring, because as far as they were concerned, they were doing this in the service of their fatherland, their Führer, their race. There is an element of the total diffusion of responsibility where no one person feels that they are responsible for the violence being enacted, making it easier to carry out atrocities that haunt the world for generations. Following the geopolitical situation today affords a fascinating glimpse at how each side in a war justifies where they are right and the other side is wrong. The tendency is to label themselves the victims and the opposing side the absolute perpetrators. A subjective analysis of why this conflict is hardly ever undertaken by either party, and most definitely not encouraged among the masses, since subjective analysis will not convince people to fight and die at war. Instead, war is sold as a manifestation of the hero's journey. There is a romanticization of war that is employed to rile up the masses. History shows us that war is often sold as a rite of passage. And the romanticization is not always external. Modern life can feel mundane. There is suffering, sure, but there is largely a sense of security that civilization has afforded us. We have a roof over our head. There is reasonable food security in the world, and advances in medicine have significantly reduced our mortality rate. The world can be soft and cushiony. Definitely so if we compare it to the lives of our ancient ancestors. But here is where the psychology of man plays a sleight of hand. As Fyodor Dostoevsky says, and I quote, "Now I ask you, what can be expected of a man since he is being endowed with strange qualities? Shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species. And even then, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk his cakes and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive good sense his fatal fantastic element. This is a brilliant insight into the mind of man. The message is that no human has ever been content with just sheer pleasure and comfort. There is an element of acting on free will that is alluded to here, even if that will is irrational or self-destructive. It is not a stretch to derive from this logic, then, that in the modern world, war offers a sense, a dangerous one, yes, but a sense of absolute purpose, of high stakes and clear-cut goals that can intoxicate a human brain. It gives us the illusion that we are doing something meaningful and historically significant. It makes us feel like we are a part of something greater than us and our seemingly mundane individual lives. But there is a long-term psychological scarring that comes with this. We are exposed to parts of us we did not know existed, vile and evil bits of us that show itself in the theater of war. It ends up scarring most of us because we going to war was not our own individual choice. It was done as a consequence of our tendency to succumb to our tribal identity, our ideology, our country, our race, our people. It is for the perceived defense of a group that wars are waged in the first place. And since it is not our individual will, our exposure to the evils of the world and the evils within us shock us, scares us. The involuntary exposure to the parts of us that we did not know existed breaks us, sometimes never to be whole again. How then do we escape the clutches of these tribal instincts? We recognize ourselves as individuals. When we do think of ourselves as real, actual individuals, we begin to understand how we think and what motivates us. The questions we then ask ourselves would inevitably reveal our shadow selves to us. And this would not break us because we voluntarily went seeking. Doing this, in my opinion, would show us how capable we are of both good and evil, how we are naturally endowed with the capacity to be dangerous. But knowing it by seeking it out voluntarily helps us prepare for it and hence control it. This would result in us respecting ourselves more and would help us ask ourselves the tough, subjective questions. And that alone would be the antidote to most of the primal instincts that draw us to violence and war. It is only when we succumb to the identity and the thoughts of the group that we lose ourselves truly and do unspeakable acts. My claim is not that we do not commit violence as individuals, but that as individuals, we are fully aware of the weight of our actions and the burden of responsibility that is wrought as a consequence will fall on no one's shoulders but ours. This would help us reflect on ourselves and our actions better. Instead of quoting Nietzsche, being like a river that only rushes forward but no longer reflects. Us recognizing our individuality and judging our actions as individuals seems like the best and frankly only available way that we can buttress our tribal tendencies and be better humans in the process.
Hey, please subscribe and share if you liked the video, and we will pump out more videos like this in the future. Thank you.